It started with a paper plate and a name that wasn't mine. I had driven 3 hours to get there, hair still damp from a rushed shower, uniform folded neatly in the trunk just in case I had to leave early again, like always. The family reunion was held at the same lake house it always was, the one where my name had been carved into a tree once, long ago, before everyone forgot I existed. There were name cards on the long folding tables, decorated with fake daisies and some cheap bunting that fluttered in the breeze. My cousin Rachel, who ran the whole thing like a military operation, looked at me with a faint squint when I arrived, as if trying to place where she knew me from. Her eyes flicked over my plain polo and jeans and didn't linger. "You here to help with setup?" she asked, handing me a stack of plastic cups. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say her name, remind her that we'd played tag until midnight every summer until I left for basic training. But instead, I nodded and took the cups. Maybe it was easier that way. No one ever said it aloud, but I had been erased a long time ago. Not out of malice, really. Just omission. Like a faded word on an old letter. I was the one who didn't finish college. The one who left to play soldier. The one who didn't marry, didn't bring kids to the reunion, didn't post about vacations or beach houses on Facebook. Worthless, in a quiet, well-mannered way. Not in insults, in absence. I hovered near the buffet line while others claimed their seats, each folding chair labeled with their name in curly handwriting. Even my younger cousins, one who still lived in his mom's basement and the other who had been arrested last year for shoplifting, had a place. I didn't. Instead, I stood there with a heavy plate of potato salad and grilled chicken, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice. That's when Aunt Lisa called out, "Sweetie, can you grab more napkins? They're in the pantry." Sweetie. She didn't know it was me. I walked inside, set the plate down on the counter, and stared at the mirror above the sink. I wasn't ashamed of how I looked. My shoulders strong, my hands still scarred from years in the field, but I felt invisible, like maybe I had blended into the wallpaper of my own family. It wasn't always this way. Once, I was the daughter who dreamed out loud. I built forts with sticks and pretended to be a rescuer, a soldier, a protector. My father said, "That's cute," before handing my brother the law school brochure. My mother smiled politely at my stories, then asked me not to speak so loudly at dinner. "You don't want to sound too intense." Intense. Loud. Rough. Those were the words they used. When I enlisted, they said I'd regret it. My sister texted me articles about women who suffered PTSD and couldn't have kids. My brother, the corporate attorney, said, "That's not a real career. It's a phase." But I stayed. I bled. I watched people die. And I saved more than I ever lost. None of that mattered here. Not in this kitchen. Not in this reunion full of people who knew me only as the one who left. The final blow came when someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hi, can you refill the lemonade dispenser?" It was Uncle Ted's new wife. She thought I worked for the venue. I didn't correct her. I just smiled, like I'd been trained to do when under pressure, and walked outside again, past rows of my blood relatives laughing like I'd never existed. Like I hadn't pulled a man twice my size out of a burning convoy. Like I hadn't stitched a wound under fire, using my own body to block shrapnel. I found a spot on the edge of the deck, out of view. No seat, no name tag. Just me and the paper plate. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. Private call. No ID. I picked up instinctively. "Ma'am," the voice said, sharp and crisp. "This is Master Chief Elkins. Your presence is requested at 1400 hours for a private acknowledgement at Fort Braddock. Dress uniform required." I blinked. Sorry, what? "This is regarding Operation Red Crescent. You're to be recognized in front of the unit for actions taken in Kandahar." Immediate family has been notified of the security clearance lift. You're free to speak about it now. I looked out over the deck, where my brother was laughing about something probably related to finance or crypto. No one ever told me the file was declassified. You were on the ghost list, ma'am. It took some pushing from high up. But they want you there. He insisted. He? The voice paused. The SEAL you pulled out of the blast radius. He's the keynote. My throat tightened. I whispered, I didn't think he made it. He did. And he's been fighting for this moment ever since. The line clicked. I stood there a long time, wind brushing against my face like a distant salute. Something inside me steadied. Not pride, not vengeance, just truth. I looked again at the table filled with people who hadn't seen me, and finally understood. They didn't have to. The world was about to. When I was little, I never cried quietly. I was the girl who asked too many questions, who ran too fast, who hated dolls but loved building traps in the backyard with my brother's tools. I didn't dream of weddings. I dreamed of jumping from helicopters and stitching up wounds in war zones I couldn't yet pronounce. By the time I was 12, I'd already memorized a combat medic's field guide. I could tie 10 kinds of tourniquets. My father said it was cute, in that heavy, dismissive way that always meant the opposite. It's just a phase, he'd repeat, waving his hand like brushing lint off a suit. But it wasn't. By 16, I was shadowing our town's emergency responders on weekends. I'd ride along in ambulances, listen to heart monitors, clean vomit, hold hands. My mother begged me to stop, said it was not becoming of a young woman. I didn't know what that meant. But I knew the way she looked at me, like I was embarrassing her by simply existing. So I stopped telling them things. When I got accepted into the Army's medical training program after high school, I didn't tell them until the night before I left. My father didn't speak. He just sipped his tea, jaw tight. My sister, already pre-law at NYU, muttered, "So you're going to throw your life away in some desert?" Her voice was ice. For what? Free boots and trauma? I smiled the way I always did. Tight, polite, and silent. That was the last time I sat at their kitchen table. Training wasn't the hardest part. Silence was. Learning not to talk when the blood sprayed, not to blink when someone screamed your name and you couldn't save them. But I learned. Fast. I learned how to keep breathing when a soldier's femoral artery burst open beneath my hands. I learned how to drag a body while gunfire danced around me like fireflies, and I learned how to be invisible, how to do the job, and disappear before credit could stick. Because in my world, medals didn't come with parades. Not for women, not for medics, not when the mission itself didn't officially exist. The day that changed everything didn't start with gunfire. It started with laughter. We were escorting a convoy through Kandahar province. The SEAL unit ahead of us had cleared the road, or so they thought. The sun was merciless. Sand coated everything. And someone in the back had just made a joke about MREs that made me spit water from my canteen. Then the earth split open. IED. The Humvee behind us vanished in a wall of flame. I didn't think. I ran. The explosion was deafening, but the screaming was worse. By the time I reached the wreckage, there were only seconds left to act. Smoke thick, air like fire, screams turning wet and choking. He was half buried, legs crushed, blood pouring from a wound in his neck. I knew who he was even then. LT, Commander Jacob Rourke, decorated, feared, quiet. His eyes locked on mine as I pulled him free. I couldn't speak, not with the adrenaline hammering through me, but I pressed my hand to his wound and whispered the only word I knew would matter. Hold. The rest blurred. Tourniquet, cover fire, evac call. I didn't know if he made it, and when I was ordered to return to base and say nothing, I obeyed. That's what medics do. We patch. We protect. We vanish. Years passed. I was reassigned, moved stateside, then again. Eventually, I ended up at a quiet VA clinic, tending to old wounds and faded names. My records were sealed, my mission file classified. I had no medals, no recognition. I didn't care. Or so I told myself. Until last week. Until that call. Until the words, "He's the keynote." I didn't sleep that night. My hands itched. My brain felt split between two lives, the woman who dressed wounds in silence, and the child who had once wanted her family to see her for who she was. The next morning, I pulled my old dress uniform from the back of the closet, brushed it, polished my shoes, pulled my hair into regulation neatness, even though I didn't have to anymore. And I stood there in the mirror, not a girl, not a burden, not too much. Just a soldier, a medic, a woman who had earned her place. I didn't go straight to Fort Braddock. First, I drove back to the reunion. I don't know why. Maybe part of me needed to see their faces, one last time, before everything changed. Or maybe I wanted to walk into that deck, not as a ghost, but as something solid. When I arrived, the party was in full swing. My sister was telling a story. My father was cutting steak. No one noticed as I walked toward them, this time in full uniform, shoes shining, insignia in place. "Hey," I said gently. Every head turned. Silence. And then my mother said the one thing that told me nothing had changed at all. "Oh, honey, you didn't have to dress up." Kandahar smelled like copper and heat. It was the kind of place where shadows came with a cost, where time moved differently, sometimes dragging like a corpse, sometimes vanishing between the crack of rifle fire and the scream of your name. I arrived on my second deployment under a false name. Technically, it was a reassignment. In reality, it was an erasure. Our unit didn't officially exist. We were part of a small, unacknowledged task force known only by our call signs. Mine was Echo 7. No rank displayed, no full name spoken aloud. Just function, patch, code, move. For the next 6 months, I slept 2 hours at a time, treated wounds by flashlight, and carried bandages in the same pocket as morphine injectors. No one asked questions. No one gave thanks. You did your job, or you died trying. But that night was different. We'd been briefed quickly. Intelligence said a weapons cache was being moved near a civilian route. SEAL Team 9 was leading the intercept. My role was support, non-combatant medic, rear position. I remember looking up from the map and asking one question: is it confirmed there are no civilians nearby? The officer in charge blinked. We'll know soon enough. That answer haunted me, still does. We moved under cover of night. No headlights, no chatter. Just the crunch of boots over gravel and the nervous flick of someone checking their scope too often. We were 20 minutes from intercept when the first explosion hit. It wasn't the cache. It was the road beneath us. The blast split the silence. My ears went numb, then filled with screams. A second detonation followed. Closer. Brighter. I lost my balance and slammed into a Humvee's rear axle, disoriented, dazed, bleeding from the temple. And then I heard it. A single strangled call over the comms. "Medic, commander down." I repeat, "Commander down." My vision blurred. "Echo 7, do you copy?" I didn't hesitate. On it. I reached him through the smoke, crawling low, my gear tearing against shrapnel. Dust burned my lungs. Fire lit up the edges of the wreckage. I saw his face first. Blood-soaked, but alert. LT, Commander Jacob Rourke. He was trying to hold his own throat shut. The arterial bleed was bad. Too bad. I dove beside him and slapped pressure on the wound, my other hand already reaching for my gear. His leg was mangled, bone exposed, but he was still looking at me. Clear. Fierce. "I'm not gonna die here," he choked out. "No, you're not. I said, and meant it. I worked fast. Tourniquet, sealant foam, pressure bandage. I injected morphine but kept it low. He needed consciousness. Gunfire flared in the distance. Our position was vulnerable. I could have called for help. But we were blacklisted. No comms in or out. I made a decision then. Not for protocol, not for command, not even for the mission. For him. I dragged him through 30 meters of sand, blood, and broken asphalt. His full weight slumped against me. I don't remember the pain in my shoulder until weeks later. Adrenaline took care of that. When we reached a half-buried structure, part of an old school maybe, I pulled him into cover. We were alone. He kept trying to speak. His voice was ragged. I remember you. You asked about the civilians. I didn't reply. He looked at me with blood in his teeth and said, "You're not like the rest of them." I pressed my hand tighter on his chest wound and whispered, "Hold on. I'm not done saving you yet." And then, quietly to myself, I will not let him die. I worked for hours. Tourniquets failed. I redid them. Blood loss. I pushed fluids. Shock. I stabilized him. Barely. I burned through every piece of equipment I had. And when the evac finally arrived, long after radio silence broke, I stepped back as they took him. His hand squeezed mine just once. No words. Just that grip. When I got back to base, I was debriefed like a criminal. Why did you abandon rear position? Why didn't you wait for comms to clear? Why didn't you protect yourself first? I didn't answer. They classified the report, stamped it red, buried it. I was told not to speak of it, not even to him. I kept that promise, even when I got reassigned, even when I dreamed about it for months, his blood on my hands, his voice in my ear. I never said a word. But I made a vow that night, crouched behind shattered brick and gunmetal skies. If I ever saw him again, I would not let the world forget who he was, or what I did to keep him breathing, because for the first time, I had saved someone not because it was my duty, but because it was my decision. That night, I wasn't just a medic. I was a soldier of my own will. And that changed everything. I never looked him up. Not once. Not when I rotated home. Not when I was reassigned to Walter Reed. Not even when I began working quietly at a small veterans clinic tucked behind a crumbling strip mall, where most patients were forgotten names, and most thank yous came from exhausted eyes, not ceremony. Some nights I wondered if he made it, if he walked again, if he even remembered me. But I never searched. Part of me was scared to know. Because in the end, it didn't matter, right? I wasn't decorated. I wasn't mentioned in the debrief. My name had been redacted from the final report. In the records, Commander Jacob Rourke had been rescued by an unidentified support unit member. The only proof I had was the limp in my shoulder and a field dressing kit I never returned, and a folder in the back of my closet. I kept it out of habit, I suppose. A fat, battered folder, scuffed at the edges, smelled like sand and ink and old fear. Inside were letters never sent, field notes, a mission pin I wasn't supposed to keep, and one commendation, a copy, unsigned, watermarked with redacted lines and sealed in a plastic sleeve. Extraordinary medical actions conducted under enemy fire. It was supposed to be destroyed. I kept it anyway. It reminded me that I hadn't imagined it all, that I had been there. Then came the call. Not a number I recognized, just unknown caller on the screen as I locked up the clinic on a rainy Tuesday. I answered, half expecting a telemarketer. Instead, a crisp male voice said, "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Colonel Avery, Office of Joint Operations. Please verify your date of birth and last assignment location." My stomach turned to glass. I answered instinctively, muscle memory from years of service. Then came the words I hadn't thought I'd ever hear. "You're formally invited to a closed ceremony at Fort Braddock this Saturday. Your presence is requested by name. I blinked. This must be a mistake. No mistake, ma'am. You're being honored under Operation Red Crescent's post-classification recognition order. The file was declassified last month. I gripped the phone tighter. That mission, it was buried. Not anymore. A pause. Your actions saved Commander Rourke's life. He's now Rear Admiral. He personally nominated you. He's giving the keynote. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. I thought he didn't remember. He did. He's been fighting this through back channels for 4 years. I leaned against the clinic's doorframe, heart hammering. And now? I whispered. Now, the voice said gently. He wants to thank you. In front of everyone. The next few days passed in fragments. I reopened the folder, held the pin again, pressed my uniform, unsure if it still fit. It did. Not perfectly. My body had changed. But enough. The weight of it settled on my shoulders like memory. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. I don't know why. Maybe because they wouldn't understand. Or maybe I needed to feel it for myself first. This strange new space where my service wasn't a shadow, but a spotlight. Where I wasn't a ghost, but a name that mattered. The morning of the ceremony, I drove in silence. The base came into view through the windshield. Guard towers, chain-link fencing, flagpoles slicing the dawn. At the gate, a young private checked my ID. His eyes widened when he read the list. "You're on the Admiral's priority list, ma'am." He saluted. I blinked hard. "Thank you, Private." Inside the hall, the air was sharp with polish and history. Rows of decorated officers stood in their finest dress uniforms. Medals gleamed like stories pinned to flesh. Photographers flanked the aisle, and at the front, beneath a massive naval seal, stood him, Commander Jacob Rourke, now Rear Admiral. He looked older, wiser. A slight limp, but standing tall in full regalia. And when our eyes met, something passed between us. Recognition, memory, gratitude too deep for words. He nodded once, and I knew. This was real. Then he stepped to the podium, and the room hushed. "Years ago," he began, "I almost died in a forgotten corner of a forgotten mission." A pause. "I was pulled from fire and blood by hands I never saw again. A woman who never asked for credit. Who was erased from the report, but not from my memory." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Today, I get to correct history." He looked at me. "I get to tell the truth." Then he raised a box, velvet, sealed, and opened it. Inside was a medal I had only seen once, on someone else's chest. For valor under fire. For saving a life at risk to your own. For showing what it means to serve, not for rank or praise, but for purpose. He stepped down from the podium and walked toward me. The hall stood still. I rose, breath shaking, eyes locked on his. He reached me, paused, and then, in front of the highest-ranking officers, in front of the cameras, in front of the silence that once buried me. He took a knee and whispered, "You taught me honor." They didn't clap. Not one. The ceremony had ended less than 48 hours ago. My name had been spoken into a microphone. The medal had been pinned to my chest. My photo had already made it onto a few military blogs. One article even called me the ghost medic who saved a SEAL. But none of that mattered at the dinner table. The reunion had stretched into the weekend. My sister's voice greeted me before I even got to the door. "Oh my God, there she is! Metal Girl!" Laughter followed. Not cruel, not warm. That in-between tone reserved for mockery disguised as affection. My mother looked up from a salad bowl and gave me the same once-over she had the day I left for basic training. "Well, don't you look official?" I stood there, still in uniform, unsure whether I was overdressed or out of place, or both. My father didn't say a word. just sliced into a grilled steak, eyes on the knife like it owed him something. Someone passed me a plate. There was no seat saved. I ended up sitting on a plastic lawn chair pulled from the garage, wedged awkwardly at the edge of the table between the trash can and a citronella candle. No one asked where I'd been. No one mentioned the ceremony. Instead, conversation revolved around promotions, mortgages, which kid got into which charter school, and how my sister's fiancé had just landed a tech contract with the city. I bit into a piece of corn on the cob and chewed slowly, letting their words wash over me like static. At one point, my cousin leaned over and asked, "So, do they just give those medals to everyone now?" I blinked. "No." He shrugged, sipping from his beer. "Just asking. I mean, I know a guy who got one for breaking his wrist in a supply truck." I nodded. Didn't speak. Didn't explain. Didn't defend. I excused myself and walked to the edge of the yard. The lake stretched out before me, quiet and still, the same way it had looked when I was a child. Back then, I would run barefoot across the dock, arms wide like wings. Back then, I believed that one day I'd fly. Now, I just wanted to breathe. From behind me, footsteps approached. I expected my mother. It was my sister. She wore sunglasses even though the sun had dipped below the trees. "You really didn't tell anyone, huh?" I turned to her. "Didn't seem like it would matter." She shifted, arms crossed. "I guess I thought if it was a big deal, someone would have said something, like an article or—" "There were articles." "Oh." Silence. Then she added almost casually, "So, like, is it over now?" "What?" "Your whole soldier thing. Can you just, like, come back to normal life now?" I stared at her. She wasn't being cruel. She was being herself. The version of normal that had always looked at me like I was something she couldn't decode. "I don't think I ever left real life," I said. She frowned like that confused her. I didn't clarify. Later that night, I wandered into the kitchen to get a glass of water. My father was there. Alone. He didn't look up when I entered. Just kept rinsing plates, sleeves rolled up, veins taut against his forearms. "Good turnout," I said softly. He grunted. I stood at the doorway, metal still pinned to my chest, unsure whether it was invisible or offensive. "Did you see the ceremony?" I asked finally. He dried a plate, placed it on the rack. "Your mother showed me a clip." A pause. "She cried." I blinked. "And you?" He didn't turn, just said, "Takes a lot to impress me." Then walked past me with the last plate. I sat at the counter long after everyone had gone to bed. The lights above buzzed faintly. The air smelled like barbecue and lemon soap. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder. The battered one, the one that held the proof. And I laid it open on the table. Old notes, photos, that unsigned commendation, a mission pin, and finally, the new medal, shining beneath the yellow light, silent as truth. I didn't need them to see. Not anymore, but I needed to. For myself. So I sat there, one last time, in the house that once decided I was too much. And I let the silence pass judgment. It didn't hurt. It just was. They didn't see me then. But the world had. And soon they wouldn't be able to unsee it. The deck was set for brunch the next morning. Sunlight glinting off plastic cutlery. Mimosas fizzing beside fruit trays. My family pretending to be polished like we weren't always this sharp around the edges. I debated not going. I'd already said everything I needed to in silence. But I showed up anyway, still in uniform, the medal now neatly clipped above my left pocket. Let them see it. Let them try to look away. Rachel, the same cousin who'd mistaken me for a server the day I arrived, stood near the croissants, snapping selfies with her boyfriend. She turned, saw me, and for the first time that weekend, her smile faltered. "Oh," she said, blinking at my chest. You wore that again. I did, I replied, folding my hands calmly. I was told it suited me. Behind her, my sister raised an eyebrow. Her fiancé chuckled under his breath. And from the corner of the patio, my father watched me with arms crossed, unreadable. For a moment, I almost wished one of them would say something real, but they didn't. Not until the sky cracked. The sound was unmistakable, low, rumbling, and growing louder by the second. Not thunder, not wind, a rotor. I stepped away from the table instinctively, gaze scanning the horizon. Everyone else shielded their eyes, confusion etched across their faces. Then, slicing through the morning light, a black military chopper descended, slow and deliberate, hovering just above the grassy edge of the property. Dust whipped through the yard, napkins scattered. Conversations froze. And then, the door opened. He stepped out without hesitation, boots steady on the soil, full dress whites immaculate, decorated chest plate gleaming in the sun. Rear Admiral Jacob Rourke, the man I'd pulled from fire, the man who remembered. He walked across the lawn, calm and certain, as if this were just another mission. And when he reached the deck, he stopped. Every eye followed him. No one spoke. Then, with the quiet command of a man who owed nothing but chose to give everything, he turned to my father. "Sir," he said, "I'm here to thank your daughter." My father blinked. The Admiral continued, voice even, but carrying weight like steel. "She saved my life in Kandahar. She refused to let me die. She held the line when others ran. She carried me through hell. And I wouldn't be standing here. None of this would be. If not for her." My family stood frozen. Wind ruffled the Admiral's coat. Then he faced me. And did something I never expected. He saluted. Sharp, precise, meant. And the moment hung in the air like a drawn breath. I returned the salute. Slowly, deliberately. And when our hands lowered, he stepped forward, placed something in my palm, a folded piece of cloth. "The flag from the evac," he whispered. "I thought it was mine. I was wrong." Then, before anyone could speak, he turned and walked back toward the chopper. My family stared, stunned. The blade spun faster. The wind rose again. And just before he stepped inside, he looked back once. A final nod. Then gone. The silence afterward was deafening. No one picked up their forks. No one cracked a joke. No one dared meet my eyes. Finally, it was my father who spoke. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You carried a man like that through enemy fire?" I turned toward him. "No," I said. "I carried a wounded soldier." He swallowed, then looked away. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, my presence weighed more than their expectations. I wasn't loud, I wasn't angry, I wasn't even proud. I was seen. And the uniform did what no argument ever could. It told the truth louder than blood ever dared. I didn't stay for dessert. As they quietly gathered around the table again, awkwardly piecing together small talk and scooping fruit salad onto trembling paper plates, I slipped away. No goodbyes, no final words. Just the sound of my boots on gravel as I walked toward the driveway, metal still gleaming, flag still folded in my hand. Behind me, they watched. But no one followed. Not this time. The road home was long and empty. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just let the silence settle, a kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. And somewhere between the family I was born into and the future I hadn't yet met, I exhaled. Not with sorrow. With release. The truth is, I spent most of my life waiting for them to see me, to look past the noise and the uniforms and the scars and recognize the girl who once ran through the yard barefoot, who wanted to help people so badly she signed away her 20s to do it. But they couldn't. Not because I wasn't enough. Because I was more than they ever allowed themselves to imagine. At home, I stood in front of the mirror. I unpinned the medal, set it gently on the dresser, unclipped the insignia, unbuttoned the collar. And for the first time, I let myself see the woman underneath it all. The one who didn't need validation, didn't need applause, didn't need a seat at a folding table labeled with someone else's idea of value, because she had made it. Through blood and fire and doubt. And still stood. The next morning, I returned to the clinic. The place smelled like coffee and floor wax. A patient waited in the lobby, a Vietnam vet named Harris who always brought me peppermints and called me Doc, even though he knew I wasn't one. He grinned when he saw me. "Hey, war hero," he said with a wink. "You done being famous yet?" I laughed. "Wasn't that famous to begin with?" He leaned forward, suddenly quiet. "Doesn't matter. You came back. That's what counts." And I realized he was right. Not about the fame, about the return. Because I didn't need to stay in the spotlight to know I'd earned it. I didn't need to change them. I had changed me, and that was enough. Later that week, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a card with a single sentence. "You were never invisible to me." At the bottom, his name, Jacob Rourke. I keep that card in the same folder now, the one that once held secrets and shame and silence. It now holds a truth that no one can redact. And if you're wondering whether my family ever truly apologized, no, not really. But that doesn't bother me anymore. Because I finally understand. Some people only know how to love what they understand. And I was never built to be understood by small minds trying to live small lives. I was built for more. They called me worthless. They called me a burden. They called me a traitor to their plans, their expectations, their fragile sense of tradition. But in the end, they were wrong. I wasn't worthless. I was beyond their understanding. And now, I live my life accordingly. No permission, no explanations. Just forward.